Welcome everyone, and we'll go ahead and get started. We're glad to have Linton Ballinger here today from Knoxville, Tennessee, also from Huntsville and Madison, Alabama, and also from Fayette County, Alabama. All those places and other places, maybe those are the Chattanooga,
Germany.
Unfortunately, when they lived in Knoxville, when he was working with TVA, their children decided to settle there when they got of age, so they, even though they moved to Huntsville, they had moved back to Knoxville a few years ago to be near the grandchildren, which is very understandable. But there's a lot goes on at Sacred Harp Singing. It's behind the scene that folks who just walk in might not know about. And being an arranging committee and the things that are behind that are one of those. And Linton wrote an article for the Sacred Harp, the Huntsville newsletter. When was this, Linton? In August 1994. And Warren Steele has had it on his website for a good while, so you might look at that and reference that. But Linton, we're happy to hear from you, and thank you for coming to Camp Fasola.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and as I told David, there's a lot of people that's more qualified than me to give a session on the arranging committee. So we'll go through this, and if you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll try to get David or someone to help answer the questions. The first thing I'd like to do is for all of you to open your mouth. When I give the downbeat, say David, and when I give the upbeat, say Ivy. All ready? David, Ivy. Now, I'm an old Army sergeant, and as we said in the Army, I couldn't hear you, so let's do it one more time.
David, Ivy.
You don't need to know anything else about arranging committee. We got a well-qualified group here right now. Most of you know, if you've been to singings, and I think all of you have been to the start of the singings, you have an organization at the start of each singing. And that, back when I was a small person, like many of you, going to those singings, that was a very formal affair because of what the people were getting away from in Europe when they came over here. It was run by a very democratic process. They'd follow the Robert's Rules of Order, and they would have nominations for the chairman, and sometimes they would have more than one, and they'd vote, and then that chairman ran the singing, the vice chairman, in case something happened to him, and then they had a secretary, as most of you are aware, that took the minutes of the singing. And then they had either a chaplain or a treasurer, but most of the times they had finance committees that took up the finances, and sometimes a memorial committee that handled the memorial service. We have many of those today. And then they would have an arranging committee. And the arranging committee, of course, does that. It would call the names of the leaders. And that's what we're going to cover here today. Now, this chart here is more important than just my name on it. This word right here is really what's important. As you attend this different sessions here that David and others will put on, there's many things about Sacred Harp that is exacting. You know, whether you have a whole note, quarter note, half note, whatever it might be, the beat, the meter, different things like that. Those are pretty exacting things that you learn. Everything that I'm going to cover today is just a consideration for you to use in case that you get on the arranging committee. There's hardly any way to do it wrong. So as we go through these things, it's things for you to consider in case you're on the arranging committee. One of these days you can use them or not use them. But if some of them I think will help you. And the other thing that I want to say up front is just as a caution. I don't want you to think that if you do not use these things, that you're going to goof up. I'll say that at the front, and I'll say at the last of the presentation that the things that I cover should not scare you off for wanting to serve on the committee, because you can do this. You just got to pick up a few things over the years, and then you are qualified to be on the arranging committee. What I think makes a successful singing technical arranging committee is, of course, you've got to have God in your singing worship service. If you happen to not have that, then you're going to find out that your singings are going to go away. And this right here will keep coming back to the big objective of the arranging committee is to ensure that those attending are treated in such a way that they look forward to returning to a return visit to your next singing. And you'll see as we go through these things, that's what our objective will be, and that's what we will be concentrating on. You may not think of this, and that's why I put this little chart in. Usually our singing day will consist of about 6 hours. And if you break it down, the first half hour, people arriving around 9 o'clock, you have a warm and hearty welcome to the people coming in. And by the way, I do have a handout here. Some of you are making notes. You have a warm and hearty welcome, and then you have a good singing for about 2.5 hours with a break in there. And then you have an hour for lunch, and then you have some more good singing for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and then a parting of a half hour. And if you add all of those up, the arranging committee is responsible for about 4 of those 6 hours. So you can see how important it is and how much involvement the arranging committee has in the singing for the day. In the article that I wrote, I outlined 3 objectives of an arranging committee. And the first one of these, and we'll go through in more detail of these 3 in the charts that follow. The first thing you want to do is ensure that each attending singer that desires to lead a song leads a lesson. He's called to direct and has his opportunity to sing his song or his lesson. And the second objective is to orchestrate the schedule and the tempo of the singing. Sometimes you can do that without people knowing about it, but we'll get into that also. And then the third objective is the singers are invited to sing and direct in a manner that he or she desires, so that they'll return to your next worship service and next singing. So we'll look at these 3 in a little more detail. How many of you know what that is? Maybe if I opened it up, you'd know in more detail. When I was a small boy, to serve on the arranging committee, you had to have one of those.
Sure did.
That was before we had these things here, back a long time ago, and they had the old Ingram pocket watches that you could get from Sears for $1.50. And they had to have one of those. And I have wrote along minutes from, I believe it was 1938, and you pass this around and look at it, and I have underlined, they started off this singing where the people on the arranging committee would call a leader, and they would sing for 15 minutes. And you see on the next page over here, they had a few more leaders come in, so they had to change the 15 minutes to 10 minutes. So you can sit down and figure it up. If you had 15 minutes, you're going to get 4 leaders in 1 hour. And if you sing for, say, 4 hours a day, that's 16 liters that you're going to have in a day, or in it's 10 minutes, you get 6 in. And I'll pass this around and look at it. We had a gentleman in our community, and I don't even remember his first name. He lived in a farm not far from where we live, but he was a preacher. We called him Preacher Sheldon. And he got up, they called him to lead, and he got up to lead, and he started preaching a little sermon or talk, like a lot of people do. And so after about 15 minutes, he finally called the number of his song. And the arranging committee said, Brother Sheldon, you've used your time. So he had to sit down and did not get to sing his song. But if in these modern days and times, there's basically 2 ways that you can get the names of all the leaders. And the size of the singing in many ways dictates which one of these you use. If you, the first one is just by recognition. Somebody sit down with a paper and a pencil and list the people as they come in, and then call the names from that. If you do that, this right here is your Bible. You have to have one of these here, and I refer to that 2 or 3 times because it's got the names of the people in here that were singing the past year, and it's got the names on the back. And then there'll be people come in that you do not know, and so at recess you've got to get around and get the names of the people that you did not recognize when they came in the door. And you have people arriving at all times, so it's a continuous evolving process that goes on throughout the day, and that makes it a little difficult. In the larger singings, like the conventions that you have in the Midwest and we have down here in Alabama, about the only way that you can get all of those names is by a registration card that tells the name, the address, the days that they're going to be attending, whether they leave or not. But the caution I put here on that is that there are some people, I don't know whatever the reason, but they do not want to fill out a card. So if you want to get all the singers in, and by the way, those people I've found out over the years that do not fill out a card, they do want to be called. Don't know why, but that's just the way they are. Everybody's got their own peculiarity, I guess. So if you use the card system, keep your eyes open and still look around to those people that have not filled out a card. It's a little irritation sometimes. Some people on the arranging committee said if they don't want to go to the trouble of filling out a card, I'm not going to go to the trouble of calling their name. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that, except you have to keep going back to our objective. Your objective always is that you want to treat the people the best way that you can so that they have no excuse saying, I'm not going back to Mount Lebanon because of this, that, and the other. So either you've got to somehow come up with the names of the leaders, and particularly the numbers important, as we'll see a little later. And from that, then you estimate the schedule, what time it's going to be. We've got from 9:30 in the morning to 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it also dictates, as we'll see a little later, adheres to the breaks and things like that. It's a tough job if you have people that continue to arrive late. And a lot of times you have people, particularly here in the South, that go to church on Sunday and they'll come in the afternoon. So you've got to always plan for a few slots there. As I just indicated, the number of the number of leaders dictates a lot of things. Right off from the beginning is whether you're going to have them lead one song or two songs, or if you have only a few people at the singing, they may lead three or more, or you may let them lead as many as they want to. The other thing that it dictates is whether you start promptly and how many breaks you have. You know, a lot of the people like to sing about 50 minutes, less than an hour, and then they want to wet their whistle or get up and stretch their legs or whatever. And so sometimes you don't have one break if you've got a lot of people to lead. Sometimes in the afternoon you only have one break instead of maybe two breaks. And it also dictates the number and length of the recess. You work with the chairman to make sure that a 10-minute recess versus 15, or that sort of thing. Sometimes you get a chairperson that gets involved in discussions with the people out there, and you've got to prompt them to make sure they get the singing going. You've got to always remember that the arranging committee is the one that's going to get the blame. Not the chairman, not the vice chairman, not the secretary. The arranging committee is going to get blamed if you do not get all the singers in. So it's a lot better sometimes to get the chairman irritated at you than it is to get the singers irritated at you. Going back to our objective again of making sure that people want to come back and be with you the following year. This one here, most of the people that pitch music these days and times are good at that. A person gets up and sometimes the leader will start talking, saying a few words or whatever, and you hear David, he'll go ahead and pitch the music. And that's real good. That's what you want. In previous years, I've been around where the people pitching the music would wait until the leader got through making all the comments he wanted to make, and then he would pitch the music. And that'll just kill an arranging committee. You take one person gets up there and talks a little bit, and they don't get the song started, you've lost two leaders. So you've got to, and if they don't do that, when you have a recess, go tell them, go prompt them. Say, hey, as soon as you get the number, pitch the music, let's get going. This is another one that I know you've been covered here because I see the people coming out of this training session here doing this a lot. Some people get up and they want to sing every verse in the song. Just wear it out. And that's fine if you've only got a small number at the singing. But if you've got a large group that you've got to get through there, you want to encourage them to limit the verses from, like the first and last verse or a couple of verses. Another one, I'll get on this again, sometimes you get a singing that's what I call dragging. You get everybody up and they start singing 3/4 time, and it seems to be that the ones following them does the same thing. So what I do is get up and have a couple of sing real slow songs. I pick out somebody that sings an up-tempo song, and I call them, and that kind of changes the tempo, gets it going again. And I usually do that after you have a break to get everything started right, instead of getting something that's dragged. Now remember, I'm telling you the things that I do. You don't have to use any of these. But this is things that I've done over the years. And that traffic flow coming and going in a hollow square. If you call two leaders out of tenor and they both have to come through that aisle, what have you done? You've lost almost a leader. Call somebody from bass, call somebody from tenor, call somebody from alto, call somebody from treble, whatever. But watch your traffic flow. so that they get in and out. Prompt those that need assistance, you know, and they're pretty good at this anyway, but if you have somebody that needs assistance in getting up there, you might say, Rodney, would you please help Chevy or someone get up to the floor, you know, if they're just all sitting there. And since they're behind them, they may not know that. So if you just prompt them to do that, they'd help them and assist them get up there. Sometimes, and you got to be nice on this one here, people get up and start talking. And I know all of you have heard this. You say, what was your number? And that way they give you the number and it gets everybody ready to call. And of course, just calling somebody in advance so that they know that they're coming. All of those things are dictated by the number of people that you have. If you've got a small singing, you don't have to worry about that much. But if you've got a large singing, they're very important. Now, this is the third objective. You've got the names of all the leaders. You know how many you've got to lead, and you've got everything set up. So now you're down to giving the leaders, singers, a favorable attitude so that they will be eager to come back to your singing the following year. I guess I could turn that around and say you do not want to do anything that would cause them to have an excuse for not coming back to your singing. In this group here, the first one is to call the leaders in a loud, clear voice and pronounce their name correctly if you can. Now, I came up in the days before phonics was used in school, so I have a hard time enunciating some of the names of the people. I can call most of these southern names down here, like Ivy and Ballinger, but I have a hard time sometimes with those that come from other sections of the country. But anyhow, do your best you can. As long as you get them on the floor, that's all that counts. So if you get close to their name, that's what you want to do. And it's good to have someone, if the leader does not call the number loud enough, for you to repeat the number so that everyone can hear it. Now, this is another item that I use, a second one here. When you start off your singing in the morning, and I know this is done at Liberty and other singings that I go to, you want to start off by calling local people from the local church or that area. What I call get the class warmed up. Don't start off by calling a visitor from some other community or some other church or some other state or whatever. Start off your calling by getting a few of the local people. Usually up at Liberty, you'll notice up there that you'll have David and Rodney and Lloyd, Ivy, and some of the others up there, and they'll sing the first few songs to get the class warmed up and singing together, and then they start singing the visitors from other places. And well, I think that's very important. As we go through these things, keep remembering our objective. That is, that you don't want to do anything to turn people off or they won't come back to their singing. The reason that I like to write the names of people down versus using the cards are hard for me to go through and sort out. And when I write it down, I can identify family members. If you go to Mount Lebanon, you've got all these old Ballingers that are down there, and you don't want to lead all of them Ballingers up front and let the visitors then be led at a later time. What you want to do is identify those family members and spread them out throughout the session. getting, then, you have half of them are Ballingers, you will have a Ballinger on every other one, something like that. You don't want them all to wait to the last, but you want to mix them in so that no one feels that you're giving favoritism to any particular family or group. And I have been to some singings many years ago when they took care of the local people first. And that does not make me feel real good, I tell you. You wonder if you want to go back there. Same thing on this next one. People from the same church, same community, or same area, you want to spread those out through the session. Do not want to favor anyone in family, church, religion, community, anything like that. And that's why I like to write the names down, and I can do that. I can look, and a lot of times I'll write them even down by families. Particularly when, if I had to do it down at Mount Lebanon, I can write all the Ballingers down the left-hand side of my sheet, and I put the visitors on the right-hand side. And then that way I can go through and check, call one, call the other, and mix them up as you go through the session. This next one here is it's a two-edged sword. If you do not call, some of the small children have their song, and usually they have only one or two that they know and like to lead. If you do not call them earlier enough, somebody may get their song. But if you do call them early, more than likely you're going to lose them. They're gonna go outside the house and start their playing. So you kind of have to play that by ear. I've seen people play the song and they just leave the building and they want to go play. You can't worry about too much of that. You just want to make sure that you use them early in the session so that they do get their song.
One thing on that is sometimes the mother, the grandmother might not be there early because they might be cooking and getting there early. So also need to wait and let them leave whenever their family is there, they can see them.
That's right.
Thing to look at.
If you know that.
Trade-off, if you know that.
There's one that I'll get to down here later. A lot of times, on what David just said, call singers who leave early, have an early departure time, and this is really important on a two-day session. But one thing that I found is useful for me is that early in the session, you get up and ask just what David said. If there's anyone here that's got to leave early, or anyone here that their family's coming in, that they want to lead later, or have a particular time that you want to lead during the day, make sure you notify the arranging committee either now or at a recess so that they can work those in. But that again goes back to your objective, what you're trying to achieve. This one is good too, and I have been to places. You want to mix the home people with the area singers with visitors throughout the session. This is real important. You just don't want people to think that you're taking care of your clan, like the Ballinger clan. You want to be taking care of them before you're using these other people. You spread them all out, work them all in, so that when they leave at the end of the day, they cannot say that you showed favoritism to anyone. Now, this is another thing that I use quite often. If I'm ever at a arranging committee, one of the first things that I do, I pick out that singing and I look in that book and I see who led first and in particular who led last. And if Sam came to our singing in Mount Lebanon and he led last this year, if I'm on the committee, he's going to be up toward the front the next year he comes. And again, what that does is it lets people know that you call me after the singing was over, or everybody was tired or whatever. So I move the bottom to the top and the top down toward the bottom. shuffle that back and forth like that. And again, to accomplish your objective. The next one here, just like when you start in the morning, where you call a few local singers to get the class warmed up. Before you have a break or before you have lunch, it's good to hold back and have your local singer that you call right before those break sessions. That way, people feel that, well, he called me right before we got ready to go to lunch. If it's a local person, it doesn't matter, you take care of them. If it's a visitor or somebody like that, it's good to not call them right before you have a break or right before you have lunch. The other thing that I look at when I look at my list of singers, particularly another reason why I like to write the names down, I can determine how many males and females are in the session. And in most singings where I have to call the names, you'll find out you have a female leader, a male leader, a female leader, a male leader, just like that. You mix them up. If you've got more of one gender than you have the other, then you have 2-1, or whatever it takes like that. But you want to, again, show no favoritism and make sure that you call people and spread it all out. Already covered that one. Now this last one here, again, I go back a number of years, but they were, when I was served on committees many years ago, it was amazing how many people had a time of day preference. And if you violated that, they might not be back to your singing the next year. Now, over the years, I found out that does not matter as much now as it did back then. But I remember many times where there were some people that would not lead at all until the afternoon. I don't know, it doesn't matter to me, my wife Ethelene back there, she hollers, "Linton Ballinger," and I'm laying in bed, I jump up and start a downbeat. I don't care when they call me. Or if they do not call me. But, if you can determine that, and it takes experience in that, or if you can find out, sometimes people will tell you that. At Mount Lebanon Sunday, we had the little Creole girl, Tate girl, the little Tate girl, and she came to us and said, "I want to lead." She's about so high, wasn't she, Sam? Yeah. She's about so high, and she says, "I want to lead after lunch." First young person that I'd ever had to come to us, that young, and tell us that she wanted to lead after lunch. So we accommodated her, and she was called second or third person after lunch down at Mount Lebanon. That's what you want, and maybe she'll be back, see. This next one here, since it's a large group of singers, a lot of this stuff goes back to where you knew most everybody in the community, but you avoid calling consecutive singers where you have a conflict that may exist. You may say, what does that mean? Well, sometimes you have divorces, sometimes you have separation, sometimes you have conflicts in the community where they're arguing over landlines, or there's all kind of things that may come up, and you do not want to put them two right up together where they have to pass each other in the night as they're going up to the Hall of Square. So if you know of those conflicts up there, you want to call one, maybe an hour later call another one. That way you save yourself a lot of problems, and again, you got to keep going back to our objective. You want them not to have a reason not to come back to your singing the following year or whenever. Try to pronounce the name clearly and correctly, as we stated earlier. Sometimes if you have time, and this is good at the conventions, a lot of the listeners like to know where these people live, where they come from. And if you can, you get in a rhythm of calling somebody's name, like Sam Summers, and then when the other leader gets through, you say Sam, and then you call the next leader, and you can tell when they come up where they're from, if you want to give the address. Sometimes you want to recognize distance traveled. We had a couple in our singing Sunday that was from Seattle, so we recognize that sometimes. That's quite a ways from Fayette County. And a lot of times you want to recognize the first time leader that, drag on a little bit and give them a hand. The next item is try to avoid any embarrassment of leaders. You give them the advance notice, just as I stated, but no undue pressure. When I call somebody and they refuse to get up and sing, they've got the first right of refusal. And after that, there's no need harping on them or asking them to, begging them to get up there or pressuring them to get up there to sing. Because, again, if you do, you might be losing a leader that come back to be your singing again, and you irritate some people sometimes if you put too much pressure. They'll get up there just to get you to shut up. And you want to try to avoid that. In the Sacred Harp singing, we've had the long-standing tradition of honoring senior lifelong singers. And you try to find out from them when they want to sing, particularly if they have physical impairments or something like that, and adhere to their wishes. They've been carrying on this singing for so many years, and what you want to do is to make sure that you honor that and you adhere to their desires, their schedule, and when they want to sing, and how they want to sing, and when they want to sing. This next one here is multiple leaders may be called if agreeable. All of us Ballinger boys, a lot of times, we all lead by ourselves, but if there's a large singing, what we try to do is a couple of us will get up together and sing. We didn't come there to lead anyway, we came there just to sing, so we'll get up and sing together, and that way it helps that arranging committee. If you serve on these arranging committees in a large singing for many times, you'll be grateful for that. And you may even start calling them if they desire to get up there. The next one here is that you should always try to use leaders that have been there all day versus those that come in the afternoon or late in the session. We made an error down at Mount Lebanon on that this year, and also people that came in at noon before some of those that have been there all day got a chance to get up and lead, and that was wrong. We ought to always try to use those that's been there all day before you do those that comes in half a day or in the afternoon. If you are at a singing and you cannot get all the leaders in by either calling multiple leaders or you just run out of time, you should try to omit your local people, but you should try to recognize those that you do not get around. I've even at times called the names of people that we did not get to, just to let them know that we're not overlooking them, we just absolutely ran out of time. So sometimes you identify those people that you have not gotten to and encourage them to come back also, that you'll use them next year. And at the end of the session, you need to thank the singers for their cooperation and participation. If they promptly get up there and sing their lesson and sit down, you can get a large number in there, but there's a lot of things that can go on that would drag out and cause you not to be able to get around, and that's the worst thing that can happen. And finally, I have found over many years that the Sacred Harp singers are a pretty good-natured bunch of forgiving Christians, and a serious mistake is pretty hard to make. So don't be afraid to get up there and serve on the committee. And hopefully, if you use some of these considerations, you will enhance future singings that you're the arranging committee, that you're on the arranging committee. And now that you've heard all this good stuff, I won't ever have to serve again, will I, David? You will. Now, you have any questions? You want me or David?
I've heard some discussion about what to do with people who are kind of unknown. They just appear, you don't know them at all, you don't know if they've led before, you don't know what kind of songs they're likely to lead. What would you suggest doing with people like that?
I look around, and if I see that they're not there, I'd say is Sam Summers still in the house? Have I overlooked Sam Summers? You know, and if I don't hear anything, I don't see any hand go up, then I mark them off the list. I watch for them to come back in if it's not recording at the same. If they come back in, then I
What if you see a person and you don't know who they are?
ask me. That goes back to the work at recess. Back when I first started, I said, when you start off in the morning, if you know that you're going to be on the arranging committee, you can get that pencil and paper. At our singing in Huntsville, I have every person that comes in there, the names listed before the singing starts. But if there's some that are not there, some that I do not know, then I send my brother Lomax to get their name. And he runs around with a piece of paper. And I tell you, Henry mentioned one item, I think the only bad item about being on the arranging committee is that you just do not get to sing very much. If you get to sing a third of the songs, you're lucky. You're sitting there and you want to sing, but if you concentrate on reading those whole, half, and quarter notes and all of that sort of thing, you lose that concentration about what's going on and who's there and all of that. So the bad thing about it is you just don't get to sing that much. But there's nothing, somebody's got to do it, and it is rewarding, particularly when you have a good group of singers that pop right up there and they have their page, and they call their page out where everybody can hear it. It moves through smooth, and at the end of the day, you feel great. But don't think you're going to do all these things and keep up with all of this and do a lot of singing. You just can't do it. And it's another reason, as I mentioned, my brother, I always like to have at least two or more people on the arranging committee. One to prompt you, I'll give you another example. My brother Lomax at our Huntsville singing, he was off running around talking to people, as he does, and wasn't up there helping me. And in my mind, I knew that we were to have a memorial service at 11:30. But I got involved in who was coming in and writing names down and all of the other stuff that I've just gone through here, and I forgot that. Now, part of that might have been old age, but I just forgot it. And David came and prompted me. If he hadn't done that, we ran the memorial service then right up to lunchtime. So the error that I made simply because I was concentrating on something else and did not have that help. So if you've got that person there with you, you know, they're also watching and concentrating, looking at your schedule, and he would have prompted me and said, hey, you hadn't had your memorial service yet. So I could have called the chairman and had them to introduce the memorial committee and got that in there. But I'm glad David came up and reminded me. I'd have went right on up to lunch, I guess.
Usually, I'm one of those chairmen, he has to keep track. You know, you're talking about earlier, the main committee has to really run the thing, he has to keep me moving.
Yeah.
You said, in considering when to leave, who, to ask them about their personal preference. Would you say in general people do have a preference for after dinner, or is there traditionally a thought that it's more respectful to leave someone more esteemed in that session particularly?
I think the majority of the people do have a preference. But if those that have strong preferences, I mean, you know, some people just, you call them before lunch. David knows this, you call them before lunch, you really irritate them. But like I just told you, hey, you put them on these arranging committees a few times and they'll do just like I did. When somebody calls Linton Ballinger, they'll jump up and start the downbeat. Because it is tough, and it's very difficult if you're a first-time person on the committee to know these things. It's just something that you learn over the years. But remember what I said, if early in the session, if you get up and say, you know, if you want to lead, if you've got to leave and want to lead earlier, or you have a preference, let the arranging committee know. That takes the monkey off of your back. If they don't come up and tell you that, then that's their problem. Anything else?
I've got a question, please. In my local singings, a lot of the home folk do not lead. They sing, they attend, they sing and they cook dinner, but they won't get up in front of the class and lead. And so we've got to use our visitors to do the work that the locals should be doing as far as getting the class warmed up and, you know, calling them back after a recess and doing stuff like that. Are there any guidelines on who to utilize in a situation like that?
Well, the people that warm up the class in a case like that, use people that are good friends or that you know real well to warm up the class. But if they don't lead, a lot of times there's some at Mount Lebanon that will not lead, and usually I'll call them anyway. I call them once. If they say no, then I'll go to another one. Go to another one that way. You know, you've got to keep coming back to this objective.
Yeah.
You don't want anybody thinking that they're being omitted or left out or being treated favoritism or anything like that. So if you call them and they don't get up there, then you call the next leader. Where you get in a bind sometime on that is that you call somebody that may lead, or you know they'll lead, but they don't want to lead that day. And the person pitching the music has already pitched the music, and you start the song before you have a chance to call another leader and giving them notice. And that's why it's good to have, what I do if I'm sitting in the class, if I'm up at the base or somebody like that, I'll always retain 2 or 3 people, maybe a couple of people that's in my general area. So if I'm not able to get that notice out to the person, I go get up out of the chair and I go tack on something to do next.
Yeah.
See? But if you've called everybody around you, you know, you're going to have to go back in the class, but find somebody. And then I usually always try to retain, I guess it's a good thing in having a bunch of brothers. Because if I cannot get somebody enough noticed, before they're called, I don't hesitate to call them. And then I've got a bunch of other brothers like David Ivey and Lloyd Ivey and those people like that. And I don't have any problems calling them and not giving them any notice. I had one person one time, they did not want notice. When you gave them notice, they got nervous. So they they wanted to be called and jump right up there, because if you gave them any notice, they just got the feebie-jeebies, Are you that way?
I want to say a couple of things. One thing that you didn't hear Linton cover, they didn't tell you to do, is to have what I call a round robin, where you call your leaders, let them all lead once, then they get through and you do it again. I see some minutes where singers outside, they just I think if they have 20 people there, they get up to lead one song and just keep going around and around. That wastes time. That's why it's good at the start of your singing to decide how many songs to lead some. Usually it's 2 and a sort of a smaller sing. Might be 3. But try to judge that as an arranging division, and have this up and down stuff.
It's a very good point.
The long singing, it was 2, and then it was 1.
And you cut it 1 if you need to.
That's a first thing I do is this, again, this Bible here. You go in there and you look at just what David said. The number of people that goes to a particular singing will not vary over 10 to 15% year to year to year to year. And if you go in there, you're going to see, you've got to come up with that number. As he pointed out, if you do that round robin thing, you're losing time between them leaders getting up and going back. The other thing, I had it on one of the charts up there, I don't think I emphasized it very much, is that most people that go to a singing, they do not want to be released from singing before 2:30 in the afternoon. If they've driven 60, 100 miles or whatever, they do not want to go home at 1 o'clock, or 2 o'clock I mean. They want to get a day of singing in, because they come there to worship in song and they want to get that in. But likewise, they don't like it if you go past 3 o'clock. You've got that 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock time frame, and you've got to schedule all of this out. Sometimes when you have a few number of singers like David just mentioned, and you have them lead 2 songs each, and you get through at 2 o'clock, then you go back and call some that's already sung before and ask them to sing 1 song. And in that case there, you usually try to use your visitors, people that's driven in for quite some distance. And you can also ask the class, do they have any requests, or does anyone have a song that they want to sing? You can do it either way, but you got to stay within that hour's time frame. And the other thing is, you've got to notice on announcements. If you sing all the way up to, you should never sing past 2:45, and that gives you 15 minutes for announcements and any comments it made, and you get the people out of there by 3 o'clock. Sometimes you sing up to 3 o'clock and they make those announcements, and you're driving into 3:30, and if you've got people that's driven 100, 120 miles or so, it puts them mighty late in getting home or getting back to their airplane or wherever they've got to go.
Then I'd like you to name your brothers and sisters on for everybody on, see if you still do it. And, just let them know how many folks in your family, because they all sing.
Yep.
Everybody in the family sings.
My mother was a White, and my father, of course, was Ballinger, and they were both singers. And their parents were singers. Singing in our family goes way on back into the mid-1800s. And Dad's sisters married into the White family that goes back into the B.F. White, the Georgia White bunch that moved on over to Alabama. But in my immediate family, Dad and Mother had 11 children, had 9 boys and 2 girls, and they all sang. And all the boys, there's 2 passed away. My oldest brother, Levon, he's got a bunch of children, and my oldest sister, Jimala, she passed away, and the others all living. We got Levon, Leon, Jimalo, Linton, Lomax, Earl, Elaine, the other girl, Larry, Buddy, Edwin, and Gravis.